Good morning. Good morning. I hope y'all are well. I was trying to put a link in the link tree before we got started, but that doesn't look like it's going too well. So we're just going to go ahead and get started. I promised that today we would talk about our brains and what happens in weeks like this where we're all under a lot of stress. I wanted to talk about what that does to your brain, what it does to your body. But I don't want to just present the problem to you. I'm going to give you some strategies for how we start resisting some of this violence and its effect on our bodies. But first, I want to introduce myself. My name is Tiffany. My friends call me Tip. I am a scholar, professor, and professional life coach. I also run the podcast, Tell Them Tip Told You. So I'm here as a community member, wanting just to gently pull your coattails about some things and provide some information to you. I do want to give the caveat that I am not a professional mental health therapist. I am a life coach, and there's a difference. So if you need the advice and the treatment from a mental health professional, make sure you hit one up. There are normally many of them that join our lives. So it will probably be an opportunity for you to make some connections here. And if not, you can always shoot me a DM and I'll put you in touch with people I trust. And so again, if you are paying any kind of remote attention to anything that's happening in our country right now, particularly if you're a Black woman paying attention to what's happening in our country right now, you have been in a state of almost perpetual rage, perpetual fear, perpetual anxiety, frustration, so on and so forth. And so I just wanted we feel it. I want to remind you of some things we need to do to combat the effects of those things. You've heard me say before, if you've been here before, you've heard me say before that white supremacy plays the long game. And for those of us who are fortunate enough not to be the direct victims of explicitly violent bloodshed, we are still victims nonetheless, particularly when the media feeds us the imagery and the stories and the audio associated with pain and violence. Y'all know I can get on my soapbox politically about what's happening, but I'm trying not to do that with this session. What I'm trying to do here is to really create a place where we can talk about strategies to resist those long-term indirect effects of racism on our bodies. And so I'm going to nerd out today. Unapologetically. You may or may not know this about me. When I feel most threatened and most anxious, I want to do what it is I think I was put here to do with this, which is to teach. And so I'm going to teach. So if you have a pen and a piece of paper, you might want to grab it and take notes. If you're in the Facebook group, you might want to have that picture of the brain I posted last night. And if you're not in the Facebook group, why not? You should be in the Facebook group. But I'll probably also send it out to my email list because I think this is important information. So we'll just go ahead and get started. If there are not any questions before we begin, I am not selling anything right now, but I will talk to you about what I have coming up later, because to me, this stuff is more important. So we're going to start with the human brain. But before we even talk about the brain, I want to draw some connections for you between your gut and your brain. I am not a nutritionist. I have my own challenges with clean eating. I'm not talking about that, but I will talk about ancient Egypt. Now, to me, I have to start there. I am not a Photepian, so don't be worried. But in order to talk about the brain, to me as a Black person, and keep this culturally relevant, we have to start in ancient Egypt, or Kemet, as it was called then. Kemet really was generations and generations beyond where we are now with mental health practice. And in fact, I've heard and have read it said that the modern term psychology, which of course is Greek, comes from psykou, which is the study of the mind in ancient Kemet. And so in terms of psykou, their ancient Egyptians believed that your brain held some consciousness, but that your thinking, your mind was centered in your belly. And it makes perfect sense to me if I think just pragmatically about when I'm angry or when I'm in love or when I'm nervous or when I'm anything, you usually feel it in your gut first, right? And so Kemites believed that, you know, this was part of your mind and that the brain was the other part. So as we go through this discussion today of your brain on chronic stress as a result of racial violence, I want you to think about where these things sit in your body, and we'll also talk about how we resist the impact that those things sitting in your body have. I debated on where to start. I'm going to start with the question and then lead up to the answer. Are emotions and feelings the same thing? Now, if you're a psychologist, don't put the answer in the chat yet. And we're going to get there, but I want everybody to have that in the front of their minds as we talk about the effects of racial violence on our minds. Are emotions and feelings the same thing? So jot down that question, come back to it as we talk about these things. I just want to show you the genius of your people, okay? Black folk on the continent, pre-contact, we're talking about your gut and your mind and your brain, okay? So just keep that. Our emotions and feelings the same thing. Let's start with the nerded out part. Now, your physical brain has three major parts, okay? Your physical brain has three major parts. Some of us will talk about the reptilian, the mammalian, and the new mind, all right? So I'm gonna talk to you about those three things. If you're taking notes, the first one is the reptilian brain, okay? That's the first one. The second one is the limbic region, or what some of us call the mammalian brain. So your limbic region. And the third one is your neocortex, okay? So you've got your reptilian brain, your mammalian brain or limbic region, and the neocortex. If you are talking about brains and you're a layperson like me, then if you make a fist, right, like this, put your thumb inside of your fingers, you can think of the brain stem and the cerebellum kind of like this. Hey, Zay, right? This would be like the limbic region is inside, and the newer part of the brain kind of folds over the limbic region. So you've got the reptilian, the mammalian, and then your newer part, or the neocortex. Evolutionary wise, the oldest part of the brain in terms of evolution, humankind, not just your formation, but also your formation. The oldest part is this, the brain stem and the cerebellum. The second oldest part is the inside, the limbic, and then the neocortex, neo meaning new, is on top of that. So as we talk about it, I want you to think about how the brain is situated in these different parts. So again, the oldest part is the reptilian brain, or some scientists even refer to it as the lizard brain. It is the oldest evolutionary part of the human brain. It's the brain stem and the cerebellum. This is where your critical body functioning happens, okay? That part of your body that we really have, we have directly no control over this, right? This is the thing that keeps your blood pumping, your heart pumping. It keeps your lungs breathing, so on and so forth. So it is that animalistic part of you that you really have no consciousness of. There is nothing in your conscious mind right now saying beat, beat, beat to your heart. That is happening in the oldest part of the brain, which is the reptilian brain, okay? It is only reacting. There is no thinking, only reaction in that part of the brain. Again, you have no control over that. It's just reaction. It is a vital connection point though, because your spinal cord connects to the rest of the brain through the brain stem. So it's where the first impulses come into the brain, and they are processed right there. It is the fastest part of the brain. Okay, it reacts. Remember, it doesn't have to think, so it's very quick at what it does. Now, it is the home of what we call the reticular activating system. Reticular activating system. And what that does, this is like, Zaretta Hammond talks about it being like a guard dog. Hey, Nikki. So here's one of those professional mental health counselors coming in now. So it's the RAS is kind of like your guard dog. It's always scanning your environment for danger, or what we say in education, in ed psych, we call it novelty. I think all psychology calls it novelty, but novelty, right? So it's constantly scanning your environment for things that feel new. So you know that feeling when you're in the mall, you're at a restaurant, you're walking down a hallway and you feel somebody watching you? That's your reticular activating system catching a newness in the environment, okay? So again, this is quick, unconscious reaction that's happening in your oldest part of your brain when things are going on. Now let's put that in the context of living in a white supremacist patriarchal society that's crumbling, and you're a Black person or any other person of color or any other marginalized population right now. There is always novelty. There is always novelty. So it's almost not resting. It's always reacting to these new places for danger in our environment. And then what happens next is what we have to be concerned about. It's constantly scanning. Okay, this is not a bad thing. Again, this is evolution. This is what protects you. This is what tells you there's a predator in your mix. This is what tells your body, hey, tense, get ready to fight. It is all of that. So when we're talking about our brains and the effect of chronic stress from racial violence, this is what is impacted first, right? It's not only scanning for novelty, it's also scanning your body for emotional changes. So that goes back to our initial question. Are feelings and emotions the same thing? I'm coming back to that, but I want you to constantly be thinking through this. So not only is it scanning your external environment, right? Yes, shoes and hose, that's right. I'm getting there. So it's constantly scanning your external environment for novelty. It's also scanning your internal environment for emotional changes, right? It's cyclical in that way. So that is the first part of the brain. Again, if you just got here, we're using this as a rough estimate of how the brain is structured. Your reptilian brain, your limbic region, and then your cortex. And so that, if you're taking notes, was the reptilian brain, and it has the reticular activating system. The second part of your brain is the limbic region, or the mammalian brain. It is only found in mammals, okay? Which is why I told you some scientists call it the lizard brain. But now we're talking about the limbic region. And this is the part of your brain that links emotions to behaviors to thinking. So it serves as a kind of bridge between the cortex, the neocortex, and the reptilian brain, right? So it sits in the middle and it kind of regulates the movement between and among. It records memories and behaviors. All right. And it creates, many of you have heard me talk about schema before, and I'm going to like take a tangential right here to tell you what a schema is. But your schema are established in your limbic region. All right, what is a schema? A schema is a mental bookshelf for how you store memory. Okay, it is, I don't know any other way that's how I teach it to my class. So that's kind of how I say it. Nikki, if you're in here, you might want to give it a more technical twist. I don't know how to say it in a more technical way, other than when your memories are stored, schema are established over time. And so your mind will store memories in similar places based on the similarities of the emotions between them. So for example, if you are, as am I, a victim of sexual abuse, then how I engage with people can sometimes cause me to pull from my schema without even thinking of it, right? I am almost constantly, when I'm with members of the opposite sex, pulling from my schema. Am I safe? What did he just say? What does that mean? Where's the closest exit? Like I'm always pulling from that schema. So Nikki says schema is your working framework for a phenomena. It's your standard default ideation of a phenomenon. Exactly. So I am constant, the frame for how I interact with men is constantly framed through that mental bookshelf because all my memories of men are stored on that shelf. Okay. Schema can be, because of that, thought of in a negative way. As an educator, I'm telling you, schema are also a good thing because, for example, if you're a musician and you want to learn a new instrument, you already have a bookshelf for it, which makes it easier for you to store new memories that are associated with music. People who speak one or two, who are bilingual, because we all speak probably one. For those of us who are bilingual, it is easier to learn another language because you already have a schema set up for language learning, right? So the more we experience a thing, the more we establish schema, which become an almost unconscious frame for how we approach things. Let's put it back into racial violence. So if we are the victim of racism, right, that can make us develop a schema for, I'm not safe in a room full of white folk. Do you understand what I mean? We're pulling from that bookshelf. So that's what happens in the limbic region. And again, it's linking emotions to behaviors because that becomes important to the next piece. So that's your limbic region. The third region is your neocortex. This is where executive functioning happens. It's the newest part of your brain. It's important for me to say, in terms of the effects of chronic stress related to racial violence, it's important for me to say that this is the slowest part of your brain, right? The reptilian and the limbic region fire quickly. Not only is a nerve impulse coming up this way, right, to the neocortex, so it's coming this way, so it's experiencing things last, it is also slower in processing it, which means this gut reaction, that first visceral response to things, is what sets up the chain of events, right? This is why if you are immediately triggered, sometimes I would argue to remove yourself from the trigger first because it's going to take a minute for you to be able to consciously process. For me, ego-wise, it didn't feel like I don't feel safe, but like I don't want to be here. I don't feel comfortable, but I agree. It's so much more beneficial. Yes, yes. And again, with the emotions versus feelings, a lot of us have some stuff going on that we can't give word to. Like it's difficult for me to tell you how I'm feeling in this moment. I don't necessarily have the words for it because emotions and feelings are different things. What happens in the neocortex? Again, it's the place where some of us call it executive functioning. This is the most conscious part of your brain, right? It processes slower. It's where working memory happens. So not that long-term sitting memory that I'm not necessarily conscious of, but this is the working memory that I'm pulling on. It's where planning happens. It's where abstract thinking occurs. So being able to strategize, to plot and plan, again, that's slower, right? But all of that happens in the neocortex. This is also where we can have very conscious effects on the other parts of the brain because this is where intellectual capacity happens. It's where thinking really happens. What's interesting is we have to learn to bypass. I don't know if bypass is not the word because you can't bypass it. Remember, I told you that's we have no control over the reptilian brain. We have no control over that novelty, scanning the area for novelty. But if we want to bypass some of the effects of those things, then it's in the neocortex where that happens. So let's keep going and talk about the danger of prolonged exposure. So remember, the reticular activating system is constantly scanning your environment for novelty to find out whether or not it needs to send signals to your amygdala to lock up and get ready to fight, right? It's constantly in a conversation about whether or not you are safe, okay? Trauma makes your brain change. Okay, so remember, it's constantly scanning the environment for novelty. What happens if your body stays in a perpetual state of alert is you become even more sensitive to those changes. So things that would not have bothered you before, you may think now that they're a big deal, if that makes sense. So you're becoming more sensitive, you're hyper vigilant now. You're on edge, you're jittery. Um, so you're becoming, yes, freeze, fight, and fawn, all of that. It, because of prolonged stroke. Now your body is not supposed to be in that alert longer than about 90 seconds. 60 to 90 seconds is supposed to be over, because you're either supposed, by then you're either supposed to be fighting, flighting, freezing, or fawning, right? You're doing something by the 90 seconds. So your body is not meant to stay like that. But what happens when we're watching MSNBC, which I try to get my parents to turn the TV off. At least they on MSNBC and not Fox or CNN, but that's another story. But when you're doing that, your body has no chance to come back. It's constantly like your guard dog now is always growling. It doesn't have a chance to rest and to heal itself because it's on constant alert, high alert. And that has some negative impacts on our brain chemistry and physicality. All right. And this is what I mean by when we see these things, when we experience these news stories like Buffalo, and right on the heels of Buffalo was the Thai church. And after the Thai church is, I don't know how to say it, the place in Texas. And then they found another gun in Texas, the same. It's just, right? So constantly there's novelty. Constantly there's no comeback from it. And your body is being affected by all of it. And again, remember, ancient Kemet taught us it's the gut and the brain. So again, trauma makes us more risk averse. So for those of us who are frustrated by capitalism and exploitation of labor and all of the things that are also all over the news, we may become more risk averse. We may become less likely to start businesses that might give us some type of financial freedom and financial well-being, because we're charged up and we're not in a place where the neocortex is taking complete control. Because also what happens when your brain is chronically on high alert like this is those parts of the brain, the reptilian, the limbic region, get a little bit bigger because they're doing more work. The brain is like any other muscle, right? What you use the most becomes the strongest. And we're already saying that the neocortex is the slowest part, but you're allowing the other two parts to get big, right, from chronic stress. So the amygdala, which is part of the reptilian brain, becomes more sensitive to things. Your hippocampus shrinks. Okay, it actually shrinks. Like your brain changes. Okay, it actually shrinks. Your prefrontal cortex, where your executive functioning happens, it shrinks, y'all. White supremacy plays the long game. So it does not have to lynch all of us if enough of us watch the lynchings. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, it's important for us to be aware. I'm not saying act like this isn't happening, but also be aware of the effects these things are having on your body. Okay? All of us were not in TOPS. All of us have been impacted by what happened in TOPS. Now, your prefrontal cortex shrinking, remember, that's where strategy happens. It's where conscious decision making happens. It's where working memory happens. How many of us have been more forgetful lately? Please do, DM me. Please do. How many of us have been more forgetful lately? Right? That's where your working memory is, in the prefrontal cortex. Are we all, so many of us are already suffering some results of these things, right? You snapping on people left and right because you're on high alert. That's not normal. It is unfortunate that many of us have spent so much time surviving. Remember, all of this does not mean our brain is our enemy. The brain is trying to protect us, okay? your brain is trying to protect you. It doesn't know. It's doing its best. It does not know. But we have spent so long surviving that some of us have forgotten this is survival. It's not thriving. Coming home, having to put 50, listen, y'all, I have two alerts on all my calendar events and still forget stuff, still end up double booking. That's because we're living under chronic stress. It doesn't mean you're getting old. It means you're getting more exposed to this stuff. And you're becoming more sensitive because you're into chronic stress all the time. Do you understand what I'm saying? That this is how white supremacy gets the rest of us. Those who don't die the bloody deaths, we die another kind if we're not careful. It has never been lost on me that particularly Black women, political scholar activists die early. How many of us die early? Lucille Clifton, Barbara Christian, Audre Lorde. We die early. That's not funny. That's a frustrated laugh. I'm sorry if that came across as it's not funny. But it's because we are this is happening to us and we're not paying that much attention. Okay? It is a tool like any other calculator. Exactly. It is there. And that's why it's important for us to remember that it's there. Now, I kept asking you if there was a difference between emotions and feelings. And let me tell you how my therapist, Nye, she runs me through thought records if I'm pulling from my schema too often, right? Because you pull from your schema often without consciousness. Why did you think you were in danger just then? There's nothing in that. Oh, I thought I was in danger because I was in the room alone with a man. That's pulling from my schema. It's not necessarily, just because it feels factual don't mean it's a fact, right? And she kept asking me about how does that feel to you? How does that feel to you? And I would give her an emotional answer. And she was like, no, that's not the, no, Tiffany, I'm asking you how you feel. And I couldn't, like, one day I don't know if she knew I was irritated. I was quite irritated. Like, what you mean? I'm telling you, emotions and feelings are not the same thing, even though lay people like myself use those terms interchangeably, okay? So your differences, your emotions are the result of your animal brain, your lizard or reptilian brain, and your mammalian brain. So those oldest parts of the brain are where emotions happen. Feelings happen in the neocortex. Emotions happen here. So often what happens is, because remember, these are relatively unconscious regions. Things happen here without us knowing they're happening. So when emotions are created in this area, we tense, which is that beautiful comedic genius. It tenses parts of our bodies. We're ready to fight. We're ready to freeze. We're ready to do something. And here we may not know it yet. So you ever been in a room and your stomach just get tight? Like, what is that? It's because novelty has been observed. Your brain, your midbrain is reacting to it. It's pulling from schema of what you've seen and experienced over time, and it's setting up those emotions in your bodies. All right. So it's important that we remember that that is an emotional response to something. Emotions are not necessarily consciously experienced. They're usually physically experienced first. They're caused by external stimuli. Again, if the reticular activating system senses something new in the environment, it can set up that. And then your midbrain agrees and it sends the hormones everywhere. And now you just worked into a frenzy and it hasn't even reached your neocortex yet and you don't know what it is. All right. It happens before feelings happen. Feelings are what we put to the emotion. These are the words we try to put to it when we're trying to evaluate what just did that to me. This is why I'm getting ahead of myself. But just put a pin there and say, this is why reflection is important. Okay. Now your feelings are the result of becoming consciously aware of the emotion. What just happened? That feels like it felt when my man left me. So sadness, right? That's that's how it works. So the emotion happens first, and then you get the feeling attached to it. It's our conscious awareness of feeling a certain way. Okay. Your feelings, because they are conscious, can be shaped in a certain way by your schema. Okay. I was listening to a TED. I wish I could remember the person's name. I was listening to a TED talk, and it was a white man, and he said, you know, you walking up to a podium, if you're fearful of public speaking, right? And I'm paraphrasing now. He didn't say nothing about public speaking. This is me now putting my interpretation on it. If you are fearful of public speaking and you walk up to a podium and you start feeling butterflies in your gut because you have told yourself over the years that I'm afraid of public speaking, then your emotion is the bubble gut, is the butterflies, right? Your feeling is you telling yourself that means I'm nervous. Someone like me who kind of likes public speaking feels the butterflies, and I interpret it as this is about to be the bomb. I'm excited. Same emotions, right? The bubbles, the butterflies, they both happen in the same place. It's how we're interpreting it, and that becomes how we're trying to name our emotions. Okay. So that's the difference between emotions and feelings. It's important though to pause and say, all of that drives your behavior. All of that drives your behavior. So if you're interpreting the emotion as nervousness, it's going to make you start questioning yourself. It's going to cause you to feel less confident. It's going to cause you to self-scan, looking continuously for errors. On the other hand, if I'm interpreting it as I'm excited about this thing, then my confidence is growing. And I'm probably going to get a little bit more bodacious in my conversation, a little bit more funny, right? This is how efficacy works. So efficacy is the idea of self-fulfilling prophecy almost. So if I feel more confident, I'm going to act more confident, and it's going to make me a better public speaker. If I feel more nervous and I'm acting nervously, I probably won't be good at public speaking because people might hear my voice quake, and I might be speaking too quietly, and I might be afraid to make eye contact, so on and so forth, right? So both emotions and your feelings drive your behavior. We have most control over reshaping our feelings once we begin to unpack triggers, all right? So I wanted to give you that because I don't like to talk about problems without solutions, but there's a quick one. And in fact, some therapists will say that kind of cognitive behavioral therapy, so reshaping your perceptions of things, right, to confront old, negative, unproductive schema is a good way of adjusting some of this stuff in terms of self-care. All right. So I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me talk about what trauma can do to you. What trauma can do to you. So again, when your body is in this constant tense, we already talked about the part of your brain scanning for problems becomes larger. That means you're snapping on people. Your mama asks you where the brush is, you want to cuss her out because that feels like an attack. Who else is guilty? A coworker can say, "Is this your copy you left on?" Everybody leaves stuff on the copy machine. It's because you're constantly feeling under threat, and so your relationships might suffer. Okay, remember that your prefrontal cortex shrinks. Even your hippocampus, which helps you process emotions, shrinks a little bit. So yeah, here's some other effects. We talked about risk aversion, memory loss. We talked about that. It can become harder to process your memories in order to strategize. Now think about white supremacy in the long game, y'all. The longer they can keep us in a constant state of fear, anxiety, frustration, anger, the less likely we are to have the brain space to sit and strategize. Now, when I thought about this the other night, that's something, this is why you need time for reflection. This is something I knew in terms of teaching and learning a long time ago. Like I said, I teach ed psych, but I had not thought about it deeply in terms of racial strategy. So I am want to say, in fact, you probably have heard me say several times that, you know, we just not as sharp as Black people in the 19th century. Like, we ain't making no more Du Bois. We ain't making no more Ida B. Wells, right? We just not that sharp anymore. Is it that, or is it that we have been under chronic stress so long that we've lost some executive functioning, and because we're not consciously aware of it, we're not doing the things to make sure we can be a Du Bois or Ida B. Wells or somebody. Like Spirit put that on me the other day. That it's not that Black people are incapable of doing these things. It's that we have been distracted in our bodies even from doing these things. All right. It becomes, I want you to circle the next part. It becomes more difficult to talk about the trauma. Circle that, because I want to come back to that. It becomes more difficult to talk about the trauma. So the more we're under this chronic stress, the more these things, these massacres happen, these terroristic threats, images. Stop watching that shit. Stop watching it, okay? I'm not getting on the soapbox right now. But the more we're doing that, the less likely we want to even talk about it. Like, I found myself this week about Buffalo not wanting to talk about it, like leaving the room. I'm an educator, my sister's a teacher. She's an educator. So I'm thinking about my nephews in the school. I'm thinking about my sister in the school, and I don't want to talk about it, right? Circle that, not wanting to talk about things. That's an effect of trauma that really is important. Our bodies, once our brains put us in this state of arousal. Yes, Black folks labeled as lazy because we're wanting to unplug, wanting to self-medicate so you don't have to process this stuff. That's not a deficiency in your humanity. That is the effect of living in a system like this. And when we change how we think about, listen, it's the people I have called Toms, and now I have to sit back and wonder, are they just trying to dissociate from this stuff to keep themselves halfway normal? It has shifted my paradigm around how I interpret their behaviors. I have a different frame, right? And my community is different, which I'm coming to in just to make, my community is different. So I may not be as victimized as they. I ain't got no excuses for Herschel Walker's dumb self, but I'm trying to, okay? So the flood of these stress hormones like cortisol on our bodies have negative physiological effects. Again, white supremacy playing the long game. Not only can't we strategize because our neocortex is shrinking, but also because I'm jittery all the time. I'm constantly on edge. I'm constantly sensitive to things that are happening. I'm too exhausted to go to this mutual aid meeting tonight. I can't do it. I just can't do it, y'all. Exhaustion, right? That's from the stress hormones. Depression. Again, I'm a life coach. If you need mental health practice, you need a mental health professional, please, y'all, please. Don't let stigmas around it or taboos around it prevent you from getting health care. All right? This is how we resist. His brain is smooth as a newborn baby's skin, right? Right. This is how we resist. We resist by not letting this shit kill us. Okay? And that means getting help when we need help. So if you got anxiety and depression, that can come from this chronic stress, these stress hormones constantly flooding your body. Get help. Diabetes can come from having too much stress hormones in your body, too many stress hormones in your body constantly. Is it any wonder that our communities suffer with type 2 diabetes? It ain't all the quote unquote soul food. Quiet as it's kept, most soul food is pretty healthy. A lot of greens, smoked meats. We eat fruits and vegetables. You can't do soul food without a whole lot of vegetables. So, anyway, diabetes is linked to excessive stress hormones in your body too, as is heart disease, high blood pressure. See, they've pathologized our response to their pathology. I'm going to say that one more time because I don't know if you heard me. They have pathologized our body's natural response to their pathology. And they've made us seem like people who can't control their diet, who only want greasy foods, who don't take care of their hearts. No, we living under chronic stress because of y'all. Do you understand what I mean? Okay. So what else? Poor gut health. Poor gut health. Let's go back to ancient Kemet, y'all. So we know our brain is not under optimal health because of chronic stress, and these stress hormones flooding our bodies also link the other mind to it. Your gut health is challenged, so digestive issues. Listen, so let's do the good news and some strategies. All right, because all of us know this shit. Okay, let's do the good stuff. Your body is an amazing creation. It's an amazing creation. My grandmother used to say, whenever it was a beautiful morning outside, or the nature was especially beautiful, or we were sitting at the beach, she used to just look out and say, and they say there's no God. Right? Just incredulous. How dare you think there's not a God? And you look at this. Listen, y'all, when we become more consciously aware of how our bodies heal themselves, how dare you not believe? Not only that there's a God, but that you, my friend, are a part of that divinity. How dare you not think that? So your brain, again, is doing all of this stuff because it's trying to protect you. It loves you that much. It's trying to protect you. And when we get ready to fix things, remember I told you to circle talk? Okay? Remember I told you to talking about things, trauma makes you not want to talk about them. You know what science tells us one of the most appropriate responses to trauma is? How you break intergenerational inheritances of trauma? Talking about it. Things like what we're doing right now, talking about it. Unpacking ideas and feelings together. Because guess what else? Remember that reticular activating system I told you about that's constantly scanning for novelty and it's constantly on alert? It's also constantly looking for opportunities to connect to other humans. Creating community is also a strategy for resisting some of this stuff. You gotta be in community with other people. Heavy is too heavy to carry alone. And one of my spirits gave me that in a dream one time, and I will never forget it. Heavy is too heavy to carry alone. And now the trauma science matches up with it. Talk about it to people. Be in community with people. You remember, your brain is trying to protect you. The most protective place for a human to be is with other humans, like-minded humans. The other thing your body does, your brain specifically, to heal itself is it can build new pathways. Neuroplasticity happens, right? So remember, if we're pulling on these negative schema, it becomes more likely that you will pull on that negative schema over and over and over again, right? We create a pathway that way. But when I challenge that pathway by redirecting it, that's the educational way we talk about it, redirection, then I can establish a new pathway. Your brain is constantly changing, and things that have shrunk can grow. All right? Your brain learns to repair itself, again, through this cognitive repositioning. I'm not going to interpret that emotion this way. Those kind of things. So here are some strategies, right? I heard a psychologist say that mindfulness is a way to reverse effects of trauma. Mindfulness is a way to reverse, restricts the effects of trauma. How to combat trauma bonding. That's another live for another day. We can do that. We can do that. If you are building a self-care toolkit, let me tell you what to put in it. Okay. If you are building a self-care toolkit, I want to show you how to do it. You are going to need the following things in your toolkit. How do we resist these chronic effects of stress, chronic effects of racial violence on our minds and our bodies? How do we resist that? You build a self-care toolkit and you're going to put in it, number one, strategies for grounding, right? Strategies for grounding. There are all kinds of ways. The 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method, going outside, putting your feet on the grass, which is one of my favorites, is when grounding really involves you doing things to put you in the moment, right? Put you in, I'm talking about the moment right now, this moment, not the one I said 2 seconds ago, this right here. Grounding puts you in that. So it doesn't allow for a whole lot of rumination around what was or fear of what's to come, because it places you in the moment. So strategies that ground you. That's the first thing you need in your toolkit. You need strategies for reflection. Again, you have to process these emotions because they can be subconscious. And if they are only existing at the subconscious level, then you can't mitigate their effects because they're bubbling and you're not even thinking of, or you're trying not to think about it. Okay, so what just happened? And why do I feel nervous all of a sudden? Let me see, what happened in the last hour or so? In Lukumi, they tell us 21 days. Right? If you still, has happened in this 21-day window? That's how we move in Lukumi. Right? Even when you have a divination, it's about a 21-day window, you're looking for this stuff. All right, so you need strategies for reflection. You need strategies for holistic wellness. So how am I going to make sure my body is also well? How am I going to make sure my body is also well? It's amazing to me that many of us, when we're, I think, rightfully criticizing superficial self-care, how often we link massage to that quote unquote superficial self-care. Massage is not superficial. Your body needs to be touched. You can store trauma in your body. Massage is a way to treat that. So having strategies for your bodily self-care, your bodily wellness, the kinds of foods you're eating, all of those things happen. I heard someone say, a trauma specialist say the other day, that sweet foods, the craving for sweetness is a trauma response. And I was like, dang, right? So understanding these things is important. Another strategy for holistic wellness that, speaking of ancient Egypt, they used was aromatherapy. Aromatherapy. I dropped a couple of, I was having problems sleeping. I got up, I'm a water baby anyway. So I took a hot shower and dropped some lavender essential oil on the drain so that the steam would kind of fill and make my own little chamber for rest and relaxation. Touch therapy like massage, the aromatherapy, those are things you need in your toolkit. You need relationships of a certain kind. Now, when I was in college, we had something called small dose friends. Small dose friends. And your small dose friends were people you go to the club with, you go to the game with, you could, go to the park, hang out, go to the beach. You couldn't cry about the breakup with your small dose friend. So in your toolkit, you need people that you can get with, right? A Touch of Blue says, massage yoga. You ever bust out crying while in child's pose? Yes. These things, my very first massage, I don't know if some of you have heard me say this, my very first massage ever in life was this lady. It's when I worked for Singular Wireless and they were doing an employee day, some kind of something. And they had this lady come in and give chair massages. And I mean, quick, like, I think it was 10-minute massage because it was 300 something of us working there. And she hit a knot, y'all. I can't even describe. I cannot even describe, because that was that emotion, right? The subconscious emotion, what she hit. It was a knot like in my shoulder. And when she touched it, I wanted to just, I couldn't stop the tears. I felt like all the pain I had ever felt, emotional pain, like heart pain I had ever felt, she hit. And I remember when she, I have a very protective spiritual cord, for those of you into spirituality. When we finished the massage, she looked at me and she said, "Tell your people thank you for letting me do that for you." Yeah, so get you when I say touch therapy. Somebody mentioned a minute, sexual release need to be in your toolkit, whether alone or with a friend. Get you some. Um, I wanted to give you those things, and I'm going to finish up with. So I talked about yoga. We mentioned yoga, writing exercises. I'm about to give you a writing exercise to do, cognitive work with a mental health therapist or a life coach that does that kind of thing. I really would prefer a mental health specialist. EMDR thing. Just y'all, we have to resist this, and I'm almost willing to say that's why people are trivializing self-care, because it is a strategy for resisting some of this racial violence. When Toni Morrison called racism a distraction, yeah, it distracts us from our own work, but it also distracts us from our own well-being. This is how, I just told you how it distracts us from our own well-being. We have to be very resistant, right? Being a revolutionary means to fundamentally change things. I'm not letting you have that. I'm not letting you have that. I'm going to resist it every chance I get, including the stress responses. I'm resisting all of that shit with the strategies I just told you about, the grounding, the touch, the aromatherapy. We are resisting these things. I'm about to give you a writing exercise, a reflection exercise, because remember, reflection is important in this. And then I'm going to tell you on June 14th, if you are a member of the Patreon page, on June 14th, yes, Reiki is an important alternative. Did I say energy strategies? You need some energy strategies in there, whether it's spirituality, things like Reiki. Energy strategies are important for your toolkit. Thank you for that, because I forgot to say that. June 14th at 7:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I'm going to give you some specific. So I told you categories of things. I'm going to give you a specific list of things I think you should start your self-care toolkit with, including a shopping list of go buy this, go buy that. Now, a lot of the stuff I'm going to give you is free, but there are some things I think you need in your home. If you know, you know. That will be free to Patreon members, but if you want to come in, then I'm going to put a link in my bio. I was trying to get it up before this, but it just didn't work. But it'll be up by today. This live is coming down, but it will reappear on my YouTube channel. So it'll come down probably tomorrow morning. I want to give it. So you got somebody that want to watch it, come give them the 24-hour thing, and then it'll be on YouTube. Will I place the list on my page? Yeah, no. I will place the categories that I just talked about, and I'll give some examples in each category. Yes, I'll do that. But if you want the instructions, the how-to, then you come with me on Patreon, or either, join us in the webinar, and I'll post a link for that. And I'm doing Eshu's number. I'm not trying to break the blank. It's only $21 if you're not on Patreon. It's Eshu's number. So if you got a pen and a piece of paper, here's a reflection activity I want you to do. Okay, I'll give you just a second to get your paper. Y'all ready? All right, so if you want a nice reflection activity that can be useful for grounding, here's what I want you to do. And you can do this when you need to. So the reflection exercise I'm about to tell you about is going to be helpful in two different ways. One is doing the list is a nice grounding activity, reflective strategy, okay? Doing the list and then creating the thing I'm about to tell you to create is also another strategy. So you're getting like a 2-for-1 deal here. Whenever you need to do this writing activity, in other words, the writing activity is called My Safe Space. My Safe Space. So you can title this area with that. The first thing I want you to do is breathe, right? I want you to imagine your ability to create the safest feeling space in the world. The safest feeling space in the world. Here's your first prompt. What does that space look like? Be as specific as possible. Are there lots of plants around? What's the color? Are there pillows? Is there water nearby? Is it nighttime or daytime? Just really, really sit and jot it down and think about, what does the safest feeling space look like? Don't limit it, describe it. Your second prompt. What does the safest feeling space you can create sound like? What does it sound like? Is there soft music playing? Is it silent? Is it the sound of running water? Is it a fireplace crackling? Are there children playing? Are there crickets outside? Is there rain on the tin roof? What does it sound like? Third, in this safe space, what do the things around you feel like? Is it cushy? Like, can you settle into things? Is it cushy like that? Is it warm? Like a hug? Is it cool to quench those internal fires? Like, what is it? What's the touch like? All right. What are things in your safe space that you can taste? Is there a lot of fruit there? It's cool, cold ice water. Maybe some room temperature water. It's cookies and treats. Some soul food. It's just a piece of candy, rich candy. Like, what are some things in your safe space that you could just take in? And what do they taste like? You don't have to name what they are. What do they taste like? And then finally, I want you to think about how it would feel to be in this place. What feelings? Give word to it, remember? Where is it sitting in your body? Now that's the emotional piece. All right. So this activity is creating the safe space activity. Whenever you need to return to it and just build your safe space. It's a way to ground yourself, right? In the moment, when you're working on that, you're probably not thinking about Buffalo. You're probably not thinking about whether or not you're gonna pay your bills next week. You know, try to just focus on the feelings, the sounds, the colors, the touches of your safe space, all right? It's a grounding, reflective activity. But if you can't afford to, replicate it in your real life. You might not be able to have a house by the beach to listen to the waves, but you can put YouTube ocean sounds on. Do you understand what I'm saying? Try to start using the things that your soul is asking you for. Find ways to give it to yourself. The old people say, take what you have and make what you want, baby. And that's what we got to do. All right. So I thank you all for nerding out with me today, for learning more about the brain, for thinking about the effects of chronic stress on the body, figuring out how we resist some of this racial violence by pushing it outside of the physicality of us. All right. Thank y'all. Have a good one. Tell them to told you.